Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But now, back to Allegra.
Well, Robert, inside a high-minded discussion about employment rights, but outside this. People are sharing... Robert's put his head in his hands. It's your fault. You started it. People are sharing this picture of who he reminds them of this morning. It's Will Ferrell, Anchorman. And this is from The Mirror. Robert Peston has grown a moustache and unleashed his inner Anchorman. Actually, it was always there, guys. But now, we have a date for the next big political jamboree. It's December the 1st for the Richmond by-election. One Lib Dem insider is quoted as saying, "We threw the kitchen sink at the Witney by-election. We're going to throw the house at Richmond Park." Well, they may need more than a house. This poll here shows you that Zac Goldsmith is really far ahead, 56 to 29. And then this is possibly why. Let's look at the issues that people are voting on, possibly, in Richmond. So here, 25% of people care about the EU. Now, that's a bit of a problem for Zac because, obviously, lots of people, not obviously, lots of people in Richmond voted to remain, and he is a big lever. But these two other things help him. This is personal integrity. Does it matter? A fifth of them think it does, and a fifth of them also oppose Heathrow, and he does too. If the Lib Dems can make it about Brexit, then it could be enough for them to win the seat.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Nick Clegg, former Deputy Prime Minister, former Lib Dem leader, now a man, not one but two Brexit jobs.
Yeah, if you put it like that, OK.
Lovely to see you.
Yes, good to be here.
Last time I looked, the bookies actually, I think, put you just as favourites to win Richmond Park. Are you going to win?
Well, with the underdogs, he's obviously... Zac Goldsmith is obviously the establishment candidate. He has the sort of glamour of minor royalty in Richmond. He has the support of the Conservative Party, of UKIP, of a lot of the papers and so on. He's poured a lot of time and money into establishing himself in the constituency. But, I mean, I've never dare differ and disagree with Allegra, but I disagree in one very important respect, which is that Heathrow is, of course, the reason this by-election has been held. Zac Goldsmith failed to do what he said. He said he would stop Heathrow, and he, as a Conservative, would make representations to the Conservative ministers to stop it. We've had this by-election, we're having this by-election, because he failed in that task, and so...
But you're also anti-Heathrow, aren't you?
Yes, we are, but
so actually, there's not going to be a by-election about Heathrow at all,
Well,
is it?
I think the fatal logic in his approach is if he failed to persuade a Conservative government not to go ahead with Heathrow as a Conservative MP, he's going to have considerably less influence by flouncing out as an independent.
So are you going to make this a by-election about Europe?
No, look, by-elections about lots of things, about the local hospital...
Well, because Richmond Park, it was a very strongly pro-remaining in the EU constituency.
And that should be one of the issues. So not only has Zac Goldsmith proved to be ineffective in defending the interests of his constituents as far as Heathrow is concerned, he's been unrepresentative, in fact woefully unrepresentative, of their views on the most important issue of the day, on Brexit. These things are, curiously enough, linked, of course, because in my view, having spent years discussing Gatwick versus Heathrow when I was in government, I'm absolutely convinced that the thing that tipped the scales in favour of Heathrow in the end was all to do with Brexit, because Theresa May and others, quite rightly, are starting to panic about the perception of this government amongst the business community. They thought the shorthand way of assuaging concerns in the business community is to say, look, we're open for business, we're going to go ahead with Heathrow, which has always been the business community's and the Treasury's preference. So, oddly enough, great irony, this, by advocating Brexit, people like Zac Goldsmith made it more likely that the decision eventually would go in favour of Heathrow, as it has done.
Now, you've devoted your entire life, almost, to the European cause. Was there a single thing that Tony Blair wrote and said last week on what a disaster the vote was and how we should, as a nation, keep open the possibility of a second vote? Was there anything that he said that you disagree with?
No. I agree with every single word of it. I could have said it... In fact, I think he said it extremely well. I think one of the points that he made, and I make, is that, of course, the Brexit press is trying to rewrite history. they're trying to pretend that everybody voted for Brexit. In fact, there were two massive votes. There was a massive vote in favour of leaving, and there was a massive vote, 16.1 million people, that is more than people than any number of voters have ever voted for a winning government in the modern era. So you had two massive votes going in diametrically opposite directions. It is a woeful rewriting of history to claim that the country expressed one single opinion, or even worse still, which is now the additional rewriting of history, that they knew exactly what Brexit meant. Given the Brexiteers, this sort of motley crew of Farage, Gove and Johnson, didn't bother to tell people what it meant. It's quite right now that people like Tony Blair say, hang on a minute, yes, of course, we're now heading towards the Brexit, the exit door, but since we don't know what the destination is, of course the country should have another opportunity in one shape or form to make a judgment on the final package.
But here's, I think, fundamental point is that British people did not vote for what people now characterise as hard Brexit. What Boris Johnson and Michael Gove sold was what is now characterised essentially as soft Brexit, which is more or less full access to the single market, not out of the customs union, not out of the single market. If we get hard Brexit,
yes,
should there be a second referendum?
Yeah, well, I think there should be. I mean, George Osborne put it very well. Here's an odd constellation.
Say again?
George Osborne put it rather well. Here's an odd constellation. Tony Blair, George Osborne and Nick Clegg all agree that the country voted for Brexit, not for hard Brexit. People don't vote for economic self-harm. Yes, they vote on issues like immigration, identity. They don't like fussy bureaucrats in Brussels. I get all of that. They're not happy. Many people weren't. I met many, hundreds, thousands of Brexit voters who said, I'm going to vote Brexit because I'm really just simply not happy with the way sort of life is panning out at the moment. I get all of that, but to somehow translate that into saying, and people now also want to quit a British-created single market, the largest of its kind anywhere in the world, which has provided immense economic and positive economic transformation for our country, I think is a woeful misreading of people's intentions and rewriting of history.
But so, just very briefly, though, isn't your position just a bit too nuanced? Shouldn't just all of you get together, you know, Tony Blair, George Osborne, just stand up and say, actually, the vote was a terrible mistake, we need another vote? No, because there is a way forward for the government. Is there?
Well, I think the only way forward is for Theresa May and Philip Hammond to pluck up the courage to face down Liam Fox, to face down the Daily Mail, to face down all these sort of headbangers on the backbenches.
And allow some immigration.
And to say, listen, and to say to people... And she
and
could
pay into the budget?
Yes, I think that might have to be one of the requirements. By the way, if we want to do what the government says, which is to remain a full leading member simply of some of the security-related arrangements in the European Union, Europol, for instance, the things which keep us safe from cross-border crime, you can't do that just on those narrow terms without paying some money into some kind of institutional EU budget. So at some point, that people are going to have to come clean with the fact that there aren't simple either-or choices.
And would you like Keir Starmer and the Labour Party to be bolder and clearer on this?
I do wish. I would like Keir Starmer to be a bit more Blairite, put it that way.
Nick Clegg, many thanks.
Now then, the question is the Richmond by-election going to be a rerun of the Brexit referendum? Well, in Richmond Park anyway. The Liberal Democrats certainly seem to hope so, with a direct appeal to those who voted to remain. I'm joined now by Lord True, Nicholas True, who's the head of the Conservative-led Richmond Council, and by the former Richmond MP and Lib Dem economic spokesperson, Baroness Kramer, Susan Kramer. If you don't mind me calling you that, Susan.
I far prefer Susan.
Yes,
we
like
our first names. Yes. Exactly.
Good to see you. Well, let's start with the Conservatives. The Conservative campaign, well, there isn't one. Don't you think it's kind of ducking out a bit not to put up a Conservative candidate?
No, I don't. I'm glad they did. And Zach Goldsmith has resigned on a point of principle. He's one of the few politicians in modern times who's actually kept a promise to his electors. And I would actually rather that everybody came behind Zach Goldsmith, as I'm sure most people in the area would, against the nightmare of Heathrow.
But this is a national government not standing in a by-election for the first time, I believe, since 1963.
Well, that's above my pay grade. What I made very clear in an interview long before they'd made that decision was that I would support Zach Goldsmith in this by-election. At that stage, it might have meant being expelled from the party. I don't mind, because I think our duty as local people is to put the first issues first, as Zach has, and what I think everybody locally should rally around.
OK, well, let's get on to those issues. Susan Kramer, we heard it loud and clear from Zach Goldsmith, and indeed many people on the streets out and about in Richmond saying all we want this vote to be about is about the expansion of Heathrow Airport. It's a single issue. You don't see it that way.
Well, two things. One is that it's interesting because Nick and the Conservatives would never have stood against me had Heathrow been the key issue. I've fought it for over 20 years, longer, frankly, than and my party colleagues, longer than anyone else, and we've been very successful. And we've kept up that pressure, that constant drumbeat on Heathrow. And I was round on the doors talking about Heathrow yesterday, as are many of my colleagues. But I don't think we sit there and we tell voters, you can only vote on one issue. It's a bit of a bully boy thing, Nick, quite frankly, just to look at voters and say, you may only think about one thing because that's what suits us. That's voters are grown-up people. They will decide what they want to vote on.
Well, let me ask you, because
many are raising Brexit,
Susan Graham, you said
both spontaneously and...
I'm interested in those doorstep conversations. You said there many of them were talking about Heathrow. Were you raising, or were they raising then, the issue of Brexit and Article 50?
There isn't a single doorstep that I went to where I didn't talk about, start with Heathrow, and I have a petition that they've been signing. That if they were interested in talking about other issues, and somebody raised a hospital issue, somebody raised an education issue, that I was interested if they had a view on Brexit, so we discussed it if they were interested. And I think it matters, because as we went round, it was the issue that so many people wanted to talk about. They said, oh, you and the Conservatives, I mean, they don't distinguish between Zach being Conservative and Independent. They're not silly. They said, you and the Conservatives, you're the same on Heathrow. In fact, we remember your record, Susan, on Heathrow. But the issue we absolutely have to make our mark on now is Brexit. And quite a number of people said this is our only opportunity to be heard by Theresa May.
So
that's
Nicholas True,
very much.
OK, Susan
choice.
Graham is saying many people raising that issue, and it's narrow-minded to expect them to just treat this as a referendum. It's a by-election, so many issues come up in it. Brexit, your constituency voted to remain overwhelmingly within the European Union, and of course Zach Goldsmith is a so-called Brexiteer.
Well, yes, well, that's the point, isn't it? The opinion of local people is known on Brexit. It's also everybody knew. Zach has an absolutely massive majority, which is based on all-party support. I mean, even a Lib Dem teller was telling me at the last general election she was going to vote for Zach. Brexit, the people out there outside Richmond Park, 35 million people voted in this country. 17.5 million people voted one way, with a 1.25 million majority. And the idea that unelected peers in Richmond can tell the public that they've got to reverse their view, I think is slightly odd. And can I just say one other thing? The prospective Lib Dem candidate said that she thought that we had the vote, we should come together and make Brexit work. Okay. This was eliminated from her website hastily, no doubt because Susan noticed it. I'm wondering whether she still will be
unelected peers, well, that must be you, Susan Graham, unelected peer telling people what to do.
Can you imagine going and knocking on doors and asking people for their opinion? That's absolutely shocking. That's, I hope, how our party always remains, that we're out there, that we're asking people their opinion. And in the area where I live, in the Richmond Park constituency, people have very strong opinions. They want them heard. And there's a great deal that they want to talk about. The number of people who said to me, look, the committed Brexiteers, the hard Brexit is not for us. They told me what was happening in their companies. Some of them were already seeing contracts cancelled, others were worried about their jobs, some had had hiring problems. They were telling me actually what they were experiencing on their doorsteps today. They're concerned about the timetable. They are very frustrated that they are being told...
It's quite clear, though, what your agenda is, though. You've kind of confirmed it. You've got a hidden agenda here. You want to turn this into an anti-Article 50 referendum, don't you? You want to get some momentum for the Lib Dems and those that oppose it. Going into Christmas, come the new year, Theresa May has now got to trigger Article 50, and you hope she has a by-election loss to deter her from doing that.
I very much want the people of Richmond Park to be heard. That's what I want. I've always fought for that. That the local people need to have their voices heard. And they've been steamrolled. They've been steamrolled on Heathrow, and I want their voices heard on Heathrow.
I think
that... they have a view on a range of issues. Brexit is one of them. that many of them are very concerned in a very real way about things that are happening in their own lives. Are you telling me those people need to be silenced because it's not convenient for the Conservative Party?
Well, it is just
I
one
will
constituency
fight you
among
on that.
650.
The people
Lord
of
Drew, you were
Richmond
going to say.
Park
Well, I was
actually
wondering
matter.
whether, so we're hearing about steamrollers, I was wondering, are we going to get a word in edgeways here?
Well, here
I
it
mean, the
goes.
fact is, Heathrow is the #1 thing. When we had a referendum locally in our borough and Hillingdon, 60,000 people came out and voted no. Here we have a man of principle, Zach Goldsmith, who has kept a promise. Very difficult for him, much easier for him to stay at home with his young family and say, I'll keep my seat till 2020. He is an honourable politician who has made that promise, and he is leading the fight against Heathrow.
But the
And you lending him...
I'm
sorry.
Theresa May didn't
Just in
keep
terms
her
of time,
promise
I
to
think
her
I
people
want to end
on
with Nicholas Drew.
Heathrow, and nor did David
Last question,
Cameron.
are you
That
lending
matters,
him
and
the
that's
resources of the
discussion.
Conservative Party machine?
No, but you'll find that is a matter for the Central Party. What you will find is dozens of workers from all over the country. I had a man from Folkestone, a Green campaigner, come up yesterday to fight for Zach because he knows that Heathrow is the most expensive, most costly and slowest way of opening
All
Britain
right,
for
we
business.
are
Stop
out of
Heathrow,
time, but
listen
plenty
to the
more
people of
to
Richmond.
discuss on this, I'm sure, over the weeks ahead. Nicholas Drew, Susan Kramer, very good to see you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
I've been getting